Imagine a world where the air is heavy with the weight of oppression, where every dawn brings with it the cruel persistence of chains. It's a world where hope is fragile, a flickering flame barely visible against the suffocating darkness of slavery. But from this abyss of despair, a light shines, a beacon of courage, resilience, and determination. That light is a woman named Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman, often called the Moses of her people, defied every convention, every obstacle, and every danger. She wasn't just a hero for her time, she was a visionary whose legacy transcends the centuries. Her life is a story of extraordinary resolve, an enslaved woman who claimed her own freedom and then risked everything, time and again, to liberate others. Her story begins in the humid, unforgiving fields of Maryland, a place where cruelty was the currency of life. But Harriet's spirit, unyielding and guided by faith, saw beyond the horizon of her bondage. She wasn't content to survive. She was determined to thrive and to bring others with her. With every step she took on her journeys to freedom, she proved that the human will, when anchored in purpose, is unstoppable. As we embark on this journey through her life, prepare to witness a tale of defiance, bravery, and boundless love for her people. Harriet Tubman didn't just fight for freedom, she became its living embodiment. Her story is more than history. It's a call to action, a reminder that the fight for justice is never over, and that the courage of one can ignite hope for all. This is the story of Harriet Tubman, a woman who showed the world that even in the darkest times, light can prevail. Harriet Tubman was born into a world where freedom was a distant dream and family bonds were constantly under siege. Around March 1822, she entered this world as Araminta Minty Ross in Dorchester County, Maryland. Her exact birth date is unknown, a stark reminder of how little value enslaved lives held in the eyes of their oppressors. Harriet's parents, Harriet Ritt Green and Ben Ross, were enslaved under different masters. Ritt served as a cook in the big house, where she had little time for her own children. Ben, a skilled timber foreman, worked in the forests surrounding the Blackwater River. Despite their circumstances, they nurtured their children with love and instilled in them a sense of resilience. Harriet was one of 9 siblings, but the institution of slavery made it nearly impossible for the family to stay together. Her siblings were sold away one by one, as casually as livestock at a market. The pain of those losses etched itself deeply into Harriet's young heart, but it also fueled a quiet defiance. From a young age, Harriet bore witness to her mother's extraordinary strength. Ritt once stood her ground against a potential sale, refusing to let a white overseer take her son away. The act of resistance succeeded, an almost miraculous event in the harsh world of slavery. Harriet also saw the quiet dignity of her father, who had been promised freedom at age 45. Despite gaining manumission, Ben Ross continued to work for the plantation to provide for his family, tethered by the love he bore for his children. This sense of duty and self-sacrifice left an indelible mark on Harriet. The fragmented bonds of her family planted a seed in Harriet's soul. She could not erase the pain of separation, but she vowed that she would not stand idly by when others faced the same fate. The injustices her family endured became the foundation for Harriet's future as a liberator, shaping the defiance that would define her life. Through hardship, Harriet Tubman grew to understand the power of love and the strength it required to protect it. Her parents' courage taught her that even in the shadow of slavery, acts of resistance, big or small, could be powerful declarations of humanity. These lessons would later guide Harriet as she embarked on her extraordinary journey to freedom, not just for herself but for others who yearned for liberation. Harriet Tubman's childhood was a stark introduction to the brutality and inhumanity of slavery. By the age of 5, she was sent away from her family to work as a nursemaid for a white household, a common practice that shattered countless enslaved families. Her responsibilities were heavy for a child so young. Harriet was tasked with caring for a baby, ensuring its constant comfort, and rocking its cradle to keep it quiet. Any failure, no matter how small, was met with merciless punishment. The lash of the whip became a cruel teacher in those early years. Harriet was beaten frequently, sometimes for reasons as trivial as the baby crying. One harrowing account recalls how she was whipped 5 times before breakfast on a single morning. The scars she carried on her back were not just physical, they were marks of a system that sought to crush her spirit. But Harriet's spirit refused to be broken. As she grew, her responsibilities grew more dangerous and exhausting. At one point, she was hired out to a plantation owner to check muskrat traps in the icy marshes. The grueling conditions left her weak and sick, yet she was given no reprieve. Her illness became so severe that she was eventually sent back to her enslaver, where her mother nursed her back to health. Harriet's memories of these times were filled with hunger, homesickness, and the profound loneliness of being separated from her family. One incident during Harriet's youth changed the course of her life forever. While working on the plantation, she happened upon a conflict between an overseer and another enslaved man. In a fit of rage, the overseer hurled a 2-pound metal weight intended for the other man, but it struck Harriet instead. The blow fractured her skull and left her bleeding and unconscious. The injury resulted in lifelong complications, severe headaches, seizures, and sudden episodes of narcolepsy that would strike without warning. But what might have seemed like a curse became, for Harriet, a profound connection to the divine. She began experiencing vivid dreams and visions, which she interpreted as messages from God. These spiritual experiences fortified her faith and gave her life a sense of purpose that would later guide her on the path to freedom. She once described these episodes as both a burden and a gift, providing her with a deep conviction that her life was destined for something greater. Even in the harshest conditions, Harriet displayed remarkable ingenuity and resilience. She found small ways to resist, such as wearing layers of clothing to lessen the impact of beatings. On one occasion, she fled into the marshes to escape punishment, surviving for days in the wilderness with nothing but her determination to sustain her. These early acts of defiance hinted at the leader Harriet would one day become. She may have been just a child, but she was already forging a path of resistance, one act of bravery at a time. Her childhood, though marked by unimaginable pain, was also a crucible that forged the extraordinary strength and resolve she would carry into her adult life. Each scar, each trial, and each act of rebellion became a stepping stone toward the remarkable legacy she would leave behind. As Harriet Tubman entered her teenage years, the demands of her labor intensified. She plowed fields, hauled timber, and drove oxen, tasks that required physical strength and endurance far beyond her years. These grueling jobs left her body battered, but her spirit remained unyielding. Harriet's work in the harsh fields of Maryland further shaped her resilience and deepened her desire for freedom. Around 1844, Harriet married John Tubman, a free black man. Their union was unusual and fraught with challenges. While John enjoyed some freedoms, Harriet remained enslaved, tethered to a system that dictated every aspect of her life. The dynamics of their marriage reflected the complex reality of the Eastern Shore, where free black people often lived side by side with those in bondage. Despite John's status, any children born to the couple would inherit Harriet's enslaved condition, a cruel twist of fate that perpetuated generational enslavement. Their marriage was one of both companionship and tension. Harriet's dreams of liberation clashed with John's acceptance of their circumstances. He, like many free black men of the time, was cautious and pragmatic, fearing the consequences of defiance. Harriet, however, could not quell her growing sense of injustice and her longing for a life beyond servitude. She began to see that their paths were diverging, her yearning for freedom pulling her in a direction that John was unwilling to follow. During these years, Harriet made a discovery that would deepen her resolve. She learned that her mother, Rit, had been promised freedom by a previous owner's will, a promise that had been callously ignored by subsequent enslavers. Harriet sought to challenge this betrayal through legal channels, but her efforts were in vain. The courts were not a place where enslaved people could find justice. This bitter revelation reinforced the harsh truth. The system of slavery was designed to deny freedom and crush hope. Undeterred, Harriet channeled her frustration into a quiet but unrelenting determination. She knew the law would not liberate her family. If freedom was to be won, it would have to be taken. Her thoughts turned increasingly toward escape, a daring prospect that would require immense courage and careful planning. Her marriage to John Tubman became another shackle she needed to break. While John sought stability within the constraints of their world, Harriet dreamed of a life where those constraints no longer existed. She understood that the path she yearned to take might lead to separation, but her heart was set. Harriet's love for her people, her family, her community, and those still in bondage burned brighter than the fear of the unknown. This chapter of her life was marked by profound internal conflict, but also by the quiet birth of a revolutionary spirit. Harriet Tubman was preparing herself for a leap of faith, one that would not only change her life, but also alter the course of history. She had reached a pivotal moment, and her next decision would define the legacy she would leave for generations to come. The weight of bondage had pressed upon Harriet Tubman for as long as she could remember, but by 1849, that weight had become unbearable. Her enslaver, Edward Brodess, had died, and his widow, deep in debt, was preparing to sell off her remaining slaves, including Harriet. The threat of being sold into the Deep South, where escape was nearly impossible and conditions were even more brutal, loomed over her like a storm cloud. Harriet had seen too many families torn apart, too many lives reduced to mere transactions. She would not be next, but her decision to flee was not simply about herself. It was about survival, about reclaiming the freedom that had been stolen from her at birth. She had prayed for her enslaver's change of heart, and when that change never came, she prayed instead for an escape. She would later recall, "There was one of two things I had a right to, liberty or death. If I could not have one, I would have the other." One night, when the time was right, Harriet slipped away under the cover of darkness. She moved swiftly, her heart pounding in her chest as she navigated through thick forests and treacherous marshlands. She had no map, no compass, only the North Star as her guide and an unshakable faith that she was being led by the hand of God. She was not alone in her flight. The Underground Railroad, a secret network of abolitionists, free black families, and Quakers, provided shelter and guidance along the way. The journey was perilous. Slave catchers roamed the countryside, their bloodhounds sniffing the air for runaways. Posters with Harriet's description offered rewards for her capture, making every step forward a gamble with life and death. Yet she pressed on, slipping between shadows, hiding in barns, and wading through rivers to throw off her scent. The journey took days, each moment filled with uncertainty, but at last she reached Pennsylvania, free soil. She had made it. For the first time in her life, Harriet Tubman was free. She had stepped beyond the grasp of those who had sought to own her, but she could not shake the sorrow that clung to her heart. Freedom, she realized, was bittersweet. Her family, her friends, her people, so many were still in chains. The thought of leaving them behind was unbearable. Freedom was not enough if she was the only one to have it. She had made it north, but she would not stay there alone. Harriet Tubman had found her destiny, and it was not simply to be free, it was to return. Again and again, until all those she loved could taste the same freedom she had. Freedom was not a finish line, it was a call to action. For most who escaped the grip of slavery, reaching the North meant the end of their suffering. But for Harriet Tubman, it was just the beginning. True freedom, she knew, was not individual. It was collective. And so, instead of settling into her new life, she made a decision that few could even fathom. She would go back. In Philadelphia, she worked tirelessly as a domestic laborer, scrubbing floors and cooking meals for strangers, saving every penny she earned. Her goal was simple but audacious: to return to Maryland and rescue her family. The risk was staggering. If she were caught, there would be no second escape. She would be sold into the deepest parts of the South, never to be seen again. But Harriet was not a woman ruled by fear. She was ruled by purpose. Her opportunity came in 1850 when she learned that her niece, Keziah, and her niece's 2 children were set to be sold. Harriet devised a bold plan. She collaborated with Keziah's husband, a free black man named John Bowley, who placed the winning bid at the auction. Then, as the auctioneer momentarily stepped away, the family slipped away and disappeared into the night. Under the cover of darkness, they made their way to Philadelphia, where Harriet was waiting to guide them to freedom. This was just the first of many rescues. Over the next decade, Harriet Tubman would return to the South at least 13 times, leading approximately 70 people, including her own siblings, to freedom. Each mission was fraught with danger. The walls of slavery were closing in, and every step she took was shadowed by the threat of capture. Her methods were nothing short of genius. She traveled in the winter when the nights were longest and the roads were empty. She set out on Saturday evenings, knowing that runaway notices wouldn't be printed in newspapers until Monday. She carried sleeping babies with her and dosed them with medicine to keep them from crying. She learned to change routes frequently, avoiding predictable patterns. Disguise became one of her greatest weapons. She sometimes posed as a frail old woman in a headscarf, walking with a limp, or as a field hand carrying chickens to market. Once, when she saw a former enslaver approaching, she quickly grabbed a newspaper and pretended to read it, a daring move, as she was known to be illiterate. The trick worked. The man dismissed her immediately. As her rescues became legend, so too did her name. She was no longer simply Harriet Tubman. She was Moses, the deliverer of her people. The whispers of her courage spread across the South. Enslavers cursed her name, bounty hunters chased her shadow, and yet she always remained one step ahead. Her enemies placed a bounty on her head so large that catching her would have made a man wealthy for life. But no one ever claimed it. Harriet was simply too smart, too careful, and too determined to be caught. With each journey, her legend grew, but so did the danger. The passage of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 meant that no place in America was truly safe for those she rescued. The law allowed enslavers to hunt escapees even in free states, forcing Harriet to extend her operations into Canada. Still, she pressed on. Through every raid, every freezing night, and every moment of fear, one thing remained constant. Harriet never lost a single person she led to freedom. "I never ran my train off the track, and I never lost a passenger," she later said. And it was true. Her Underground Railroad was not just a network, it was a promise. She was more than a conductor. She was more than a rescuer. She was a force of nature, a woman whose very existence defied the world's expectations. And she was just getting started. Harriet Tubman's success as a conductor on the Underground Railroad was not a matter of luck. It was a carefully crafted system of skill, intelligence, and unshakable resolve. Every journey she led was a battle against time, terrain, and the ever-present threat of capture. But Harriet had spent her life learning the land, reading the stars, and outthinking those who sought to break her spirit. She was no ordinary woman. She was a strategist, a leader, and a master of escape. She knew the eastern shore of Maryland as intimately as she knew her own hands. Every marsh, every river, every hollow tree that could serve as a hiding place, she had memorized them all. As a child, she had navigated these same landscapes while tending muskrat traps or working in the fields. Now she turned that knowledge into a weapon against the system that had tried to keep her bound in chains. The Underground Railroad was not a literal railroad, but a loose network of people, safe houses, and hidden paths stretching from the deep South to the free North. Harriet relied on a vast coalition of abolitionists, free black families, and sympathetic Quakers who opened their homes to fugitives. These sanctuaries were places of refuge where escapees could rest, eat, and recover before continuing their perilous journey. Two of her most trusted allies were William Still, a free black man in Philadelphia who documented the escapes of enslaved people, and Thomas Garrett, a Quaker abolitionist in Wilmington, Delaware. Both men provided shelter, money, and crucial intelligence on the best routes to avoid capture. But Harriet's network extended beyond known abolitionists. She also cultivated relationships with informants, plantation workers, and even some sympathetic whites who secretly opposed slavery. These individuals fed her information on bounty hunters, patrol schedules, and slave catcher movements. Her methods were bold, unconventional, and sometimes ruthless. She carried a pistol not just for self-defense, but as a reminder to those she guided there could be no turning back. Fear was not an option. "You'll be free, or you'll die a slave," she told them, ensuring that hesitation did not jeopardize the group's safety. Harriet also developed a unique system of coded communication. She used spirituals, African American folk songs infused with hidden messages, to signal her presence. A verse of "Go down, Moses" meant she was nearby, while a different melody signaled danger. To outsiders, they were just songs of sorrow and faith, but to those in hiding, they were lifelines. Disguise was another tool in her arsenal. Harriet could transform herself from an exhausted field worker into an elderly woman leaning on a cane, or a poor laborer leading 2 live chickens to market. She understood how the world perceived enslaved people, and she used those assumptions against her enemies. Once, she found herself walking straight toward a former enslaver on the road. Thinking quickly, she grabbed a newspaper, a bold move, considering most enslaved people were assumed to be illiterate. She held it up and pretended to read, shielding her face just enough. The man never looked twice, but her greatest weapon was instinct. She seemed to have a 6th sense, an ability to sense danger before it arrived. More than once, she suddenly changed direction, guiding her group away from approaching slave catchers before they had even been spotted. Some said it was her deep faith guiding her. Others believed it was years of experience. Whatever the source, it kept her, and every soul she led, safe. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 had made escape even more treacherous. The law allowed bounty hunters to track and capture escaped slaves even in free states, forcing Harriet to extend her journeys into Canada, where slavery had been abolished. Yet despite the rising dangers, she never lost a single passenger. Harriet Tubman's journeys were not just daring escapes, they were declarations of war against the institution of slavery. Every step she took was an act of defiance. Every life she saved was a victory, and she was far from finished. By 1858, Harriet Tubman had become a name spoken in whispers by those who sought freedom and by those who sought to stop her. Her rescues had made her a legend, and that legend reached the ears of John Brown, the radical abolitionist who believed that slavery could only be ended through bloodshed. Brown was no ordinary activist. He was a man consumed by an unshakable belief that he was chosen by God to destroy slavery. Where others sought gradual reform, Brown sought revolution. He envisioned an armed uprising of enslaved people, a war that would topple the system at its roots. And for this mission, he needed people who knew the landscape, people who understood how to move through enemy territory undetected. He needed Harriet Tubman. When the two finally met, it was as though 2 storms had collided. Both were driven by divine purpose. Both were willing to risk everything. Brown, seeing Harriet's extraordinary leadership, affectionately called her General Tubman. Harriet agreed to help, not with weapons, but with knowledge. She became one of Brown's most trusted advisors. She helped him understand the intricate web of the Underground Railroad and how it could be used to move men and supplies. She recruited freedmen from southern Ontario, those who had once been enslaved and were willing to fight for the liberation of others. Brown's plan was bold, perhaps too bold. He aimed to seize the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia, in 1859. With the stolen weapons, he would arm enslaved people and lead them in a rebellion, carving out a free stronghold in the South. Harriet believed in the cause, but fate intervened. Just before the raid, she fell ill and was unable to join him. Without her, the mission went forward. But the plan failed. Brown and his men took the arsenal, but reinforcements never arrived. The U.S. Marines, led by Colonel Robert E. Lee, crushed the rebellion. Brown was captured, tried for treason, and sentenced to death. On December 2, 1859, John Brown was hanged. His last words echoed his unwavering conviction. "I am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away but with blood." Harriet was devastated by the loss of her friend, but her resolve did not waver. Brown had believed in a war that would end slavery. And though his uprising had failed, Harriet knew that war was coming. She would be ready. The fight for freedom was far from over. It was only just beginning. By 1861, the nation was at war. The long-simmering tensions over slavery had erupted into bloodshed, and for Harriet Tubman, this was not just a conflict between North and South, it was a divine reckoning. The war, she believed, would be the great turning point, the battle that would finally bring an end to the suffering of her people. And she would not stand by as a spectator. She would fight. Harriet volunteered for the Union Army, offering her services as a nurse, tending to wounded soldiers and the newly freed people who flooded Union camps. Disease ran rampant in these makeshift hospitals, but Harriet, with her knowledge of herbal medicine passed down from her mother, became a healer. She brewed remedies from roots and plants, easing fevers and infections where conventional medicine failed. But Harriet's greatest contributions to the war effort would not be made in the sick room. Union officers quickly realized that she possessed a skill set far beyond nursing. She knew the southern landscape intimately. She could navigate dense forests, cross rivers unnoticed, and interpret the signs of nature like second nature. She was more than a nurse. She was a tactician, a scout, and a spy. With a group of trusted scouts, Harriet ventured deep into Confederate territory, gathering intelligence that would prove invaluable to the Union cause. She mapped unfamiliar terrain, identified enemy supply lines, and relayed critical information on Confederate troop movements. Time and again, she slipped past enemy lines, unseen and unheard, delivering the intelligence that allowed the Union Army to strike with precision. Then came one of the most daring operations of the war, the Combahee River Raid. On June 1, 1863, Harriet Tubman led 3 Union gunboats up the Combahee River in South Carolina. The waters were treacherous, filled with Confederate-planted mines, but Harriet knew the safest routes. She guided the boats, ensuring that the explosives did not claim a single Union life. As the gunboats approached, Union troops stormed ashore, setting fire to plantations and destroying Confederate supply lines. Slave owners and overseers ran in terror, unable to stop what was happening. But it wasn't just soldiers who rushed forward. Hundreds of enslaved men, women, and children flooded toward the riverbanks. Harriet stood on the deck of the gunboat, watching the scene unfold. Women carried steaming pots of rice, refusing to leave behind even a single meal. Children clung to their mothers, eyes wide with both fear and wonder. Families moved as one, pushing past their former oppressors, who could do nothing to stop them now. The overseers screamed for them to stay. Some even brandished weapons, trying to corral them back into bondage. But they were too late. Harriet had delivered them to freedom. By the time the raid was over, more than 750 enslaved people had been rescued. Harriet Tubman was no longer just a conductor on the Underground Railroad. She was a military leader, a liberator in war as she had been in peace. As the Civil War raged on, Harriet continued her service, scouting, nursing, and working as a spy. She did not seek recognition, nor did she ask for reward. Her mission had never been for glory. It had always been for freedom. And when the war finally ended in 1865, Harriet Tubman did not stop fighting. She knew the battle for true equality was far from over. Her greatest war had been won, but her work had only just begun. The war had ended, but Harriet Tubman's fight was far from over. The Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment had legally abolished slavery in the United States, but true freedom, the kind that came with dignity, opportunity, and equality, was still an elusive dream for many. Harriet had dedicated her life to freeing others, and now she would dedicate the rest of it to ensuring that freedom meant more than just survival. She returned to Auburn, New York, where she had purchased land years earlier with the little money she had earned. For Harriet, Auburn became a refuge, not just for herself, but for all those in need. She opened her home to the sick, the elderly, and the poor, offering shelter to those society had cast aside. She had spent her life breaking chains, and now she would spend it lifting others up. But despite her heroism during the war, her role as a nurse, a scout, a spy, recognition and financial support were slow to come. The U.S. government had promised pensions to veterans and those who had served the Union Army, but for years, Harriet received nothing. She petitioned Congress repeatedly, but bureaucratic red tape and racial prejudice stood in her way. It wasn't until 1899, nearly 34 years after the war ended, that she was finally granted a pension. But even then, the government did not recognize her own service. Instead, she was given a small pension as the widow of Nelson Davis, a Union soldier whom she had married years earlier. It was a cruel irony. A woman who had risked her life for the nation was paid not for her bravery, but for being the wife of a man who had fought. Still, Harriet pressed on. She had never fought for money or recognition. She had fought for justice. And justice, she knew, was not just about race. It was about gender, too. As the nation entered a new era, Harriet turned her attention to another great cause, the fight for women's rights. Though she had never learned to read or write, Harriet understood the power of voice. She began working alongside some of the most prominent suffragists of the time, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Lucretia Mott. Though she was not a frequent speaker, her mere presence at suffrage meetings was a powerful statement. Here stood a woman who had risked everything for freedom, a woman who had fought battles that most could only imagine. When she did speak, her words cut through the noise. She framed the struggle for women's suffrage as a continuation of the battle she had waged her entire life. She reminded audiences that freedom was not just about being unchained, it was about having a voice, about having the power to shape one's own destiny. At one event, when asked whether she thought women should have the right to vote, she responded simply, "I have been fighting for liberty for 70 years, and I will keep on fighting until the end." She had lived through slavery. She had seen war. She had walked through fire and emerged stronger. And now, even as an elderly woman, she would not stop fighting. Her presence in the movement was a reminder to all. Freedom was never given. It was taken, and the battle was not yet won. Time had never been an enemy Harriet Tubman feared. She had outrun bounty hunters, defied the weight of slavery, and marched through war. But even the strongest warriors cannot outrun the passage of years. As she grew older, the burdens she had carried for so long began to take their toll. The head injury she had suffered as a child, the devastating blow from the iron weight, had haunted her throughout her life. The episodes of dizziness, headaches, and sudden blackouts became more frequent as the years wore on. Yet even as pain racked her body, Harriet refused to slow down. She had spent her life in service of others, and she would continue to do so until the very end. In 1908, she established the Harriet Tubman Home for the Aged, a place of refuge for elderly African Americans who had no one to care for them. She knew what it meant to be abandoned, to have no safety, no home. She had dedicated her life to rescuing people from chains. Now, in her final years, she was determined to give them dignity in their twilight. But Harriet herself was not spared from hardship. She struggled financially, despite her legendary status. She had never been paid fairly for her wartime service, and what little she had went to those in need. She had to sell produce and raise chickens to support the home, and at times, she relied on the generosity of friends and admirers. Eventually, her health declined to the point where she could no longer care for herself, and so she moved into the very home she had founded, surrounded by those who loved and honored her. Even in her frailty, she remained a beacon of strength. Harriet never lost her faith. It had carried her through slavery, through war, through suffering, and it carried her now as she approached the final journey of her life. In her last days, as she felt the weight of time pressing upon her, she turned to those around her and spoke with quiet certainty, "I go to prepare a place for you." It was a promise, not just a farewell. A promise that she would continue to watch over those she had fought for, that she would still lead the way, just as she had done on the Underground Railroad so many years before. On March 10, 1913, Harriet Tubman passed away at the age of 91. Her body had finally succumbed, but her spirit, unyielding, unbreakable, was far from gone. For Harriet Tubman, death was not an end. It was simply another step in the journey. Her life had been one of action, of defiance, of love, and even as she left this world, her legacy was only just beginning. Harriet Tubman's life was one of unparalleled courage, a life that echoes far beyond the constraints of her time. Her work as a conductor on the Underground Railroad is nothing short of legendary, but her legacy encompasses so much more. As a spy, a nurse, and an activist, Harriet's contributions shaped not just the trajectory of her own life, but the lives of countless others across generations and centuries. Against all odds, against the weight of slavery, the fear of capture, and the threat of death, Harriet Tubman carved a path of liberation. She did not just secure her own freedom, she fought to liberate others, making multiple treacherous journeys back into slaveholding states to rescue her family, friends, and strangers. Her unwavering determination turned her into one of the most iconic figures in American history. But Harriet's influence did not stop with the abolition of slavery. Her courage, her faith, her resilience became a rallying cry for future generations, those who would continue the struggle for justice and equality in all its forms. Harriet was not just an activist for her time. She was an eternal symbol of what one person can achieve when driven by a moral compass and an unshakable belief in freedom. In 2016, more than a century after her death, Harriet was chosen to be the new face of the $20 bill. This recognition, though delayed, symbolized a nation's attempt to honor her profound legacy. Her face, once erased from history by those who sought to suppress her, would now serve as a reminder of the power of courage, of resilience, and of sacrifice. Harriet Tubman's face, gracing America's currency, would now stand as a testament to what is possible when we fight for what is right, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. Her life and legacy teach us that freedom is not given, it is earned through struggle. Bravery is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. Her name is not just a marker of the past, but a call to action for the present and the future. Harriet Tubman did not just change the course of her own life, she transformed the lives of all those who follow in her footsteps. Her fight against slavery was not only a fight for the freedom of Black Americans, it was a fight for the humanity of all people. Even today, Harriet's legacy lives on in the ongoing struggles for justice and equality. Whether we are advocating for racial equality, women's rights, or freedom for all oppressed peoples, Harriet Tubman's story remains a touchstone, a reminder that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things. She is a beacon for all who dare to dream of a better world, and for all who believe that change is possible if we have the courage to act. Harriet Tubman's name is more than history. It is a living testament to what it means to stand up for what is right, no matter the cost. Her courage, sacrifice, and unwavering belief in freedom continue to inspire us, driving us forward in our own struggles for justice. Harriet's legacy is a legacy of hope, empowerment, and resistance, a legacy that will never fade because it is woven into the very fabric of our collective fight for a better world. As we close the book on Harriet Tubman's life, let us not forget that her story is not just a tale of the past. It is a lesson for the present and the future. Her courage, her unyielding faith, and her love for humanity are a beacon of hope that will guide us for generations to come. She proved that one person, armed with conviction and purpose, can change the course of history. Harriet Tubman was and always will be a symbol of freedom, a name that will echo through history as long as the fight for justice endures. Thank you for watching. If you found Harriet Tubman's story inspiring, consider supporting this channel by watching the next video on screen. Leave a comment, hit the like button, and don't forget to subscribe to keep learning about the incredible figures who shaped our world. See you in the next one.